Mira Business FM, Dubai's home of business radio.
Good afternoon and welcome to Midday Majlis with myself, Sahar Mushtaq, on Mira Business FM, where conversations connect and ideas come alive right at midday. Before we dive in, remember that you can catch us live on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, Telegram, and our podcast is available on all your favorite platforms. Today on Midday Majlis, we're discussing an important and timely topic, which is around student safety in the digital learning space. The UAE is urging stronger digital discipline among students during remote learning period, and the guidance comes as schools continue to balance in-person and the online learning environments where students are spending more time on digital platforms for classes, assignments, and of course, communication. So while the remote learning offers flexibility and access to education, it also raises concerns around online safety, screen time management, cyber risks, and student behavior in virtual classrooms. And this is something that has placed a greater responsibility on schools, parents, and safeguarding teams to ensure that students remain protected even outside the traditional classroom setting. And so today on Midday Majlis here on Mira Business FM, we will explore what digital discipline really means, what risks students are facing, and how schools and families can work together to create a safer online learning environment. And to help us understand this better, we're joined by Sajid Khan, who is the founder and group CEO, Elite Group Safeguarding Specialist here in the GCC with years of experience from the UK. He's currently joining us from Riyadh. He has worked extensively in student protection, online safety frameworks, and school safeguarding systems. And today, he will shed light on this very important and evolving topic. We're so happy to have you with us, Sajid.
Good afternoon, Sahar. Thank you so much for having me back. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm very well. How are you? And how are you staying safe?
Very well, thank you so much. It's a very important time, particularly with students being online now with the regional affairs happening. I think it's extremely important for us to talk about student safety online, particularly in the cyberspace.
Definitely.
With safeguarding, the only thing that changes is the structure. The risks don't go away. It's just the environment, and I think it's important to talk about
that. It certainly is important. And let's begin by looking at the current situation students are facing in the digital space, especially as the remote learning continues to be part of education systems here in the region. So, what are the biggest online risks students face during this period? Let's talk about here in the UAE and the wider Gulf.
Yeah, so currently the UAE is just very recently announced some guidance, which was fantastic, for parents and for families to ensure that they can follow how to keep their children safe. So I think one of the biggest risks right now for students online is just the lack of monitoring that could take place when you're online as opposed to in the classroom. So, as I mentioned, the structure has changed. And what we mean by that is it's very easy to be online and get away with things as you would not ordinarily in the classroom, because you don't have oversight from a teacher, and you don't have an adult in the room a teacher who can identify concerns in safeguarding, and obviously in terms of protection as well on the type of applications you're using, the people you're speaking to, for example. So many risks that come to the forefront when you're online.
Right. And the whole situation is a bit of a challenge right now, right? So now moving deeper into safeguarding systems, how do schools identify if a student is being exposed to harmful or unsafe content at home while learning?
So I think it's extremely difficult because unless or until the children are only using school platforms, it's very hard for us to identify exactly what software children are using. No, I don't think it's fair. I think it's fair to say many parents are not cybersecurity experts. We don't expect them to be. They should not be. I think it's just about the discipline comes from just understanding the risks and trying to mitigate those. And how do we do those? Making sure that the schools are providing clarity to parents. They are very clear about the platforms that need to be used, only platforms which are for the school. For example, whether it's Google Meet, whether it's Teams, these are heavily regulated by the school by way of protection. And obviously, it's important that the parents are keeping a close eye on the children as well. I think this is key. Ultimately, you're only as safe as what you can see, and I think that's very, very important.
Right. And focusing on the behavior and expectations. So, how are students taught responsibility when it comes to remote learning?
So I think the responsibility is you. I mean, again, when you are in school, this is usually trained and taught and delivered by the school as it should be. Safeguarding and child protection across the GCC, particularly even in the UK, the framework does teach online safety to schools. They do have an online policy. They do have a safety policy as well, which parents can have access to. I think children can be taught this again continuously from the school, and also I think parents need to spend that extra bit of time with children to explain the risks that they are exposed to. So I mean, in this day and age, it's very easy, as you know, to create an alias online via AI. More often, children think they are speaking to somebody probably their own age, whether it's through an application or through a social media platform. And you don't really know who is on the other side. These are the risks. You don't know where they're from, what age they are. We have now, in the day and age of VPNs, which are virtual private networks, these are very high risk as well. People can put those on and you can suddenly appear as in a totally different part of the world. So I think a lot of these risks do need to be explained to children, particularly, going to the adolescence age who are more high risk to, some of these challenges that parents and schools are facing.
Right. And well, I do understand that what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It is a bit of a risk, by the way, having to learn at home, especially when I think parents are not around and they have their day jobs as well. So
Yeah.
maybe work from home for parents as well is going to help this situation. But when it comes to safeguarding measures, are there any latest ones in place when learning happens outside a school supervision?
So I think the easiest and the most effective measures for in terms of online safety are restrictions that could be put on by the parents, whether it's on an application via an iPad, via a laptop. I think these applications are really, really important to be monitored by parents. I think another thing which is really important is the students' behavior. So what I mean by that is it's very important to reiterate that message to children that irrespective of the lesson being delivered, whether it's in a classroom online or a physical classroom, the behavior must remain the same. So whether that is, behaving in a disrespectful or unsavory way to your peers, or whether that's using language which ordinarily would not be acceptable in the school, should not be acceptable online. So I think that's the same that should extend and must extend to the general decorum of a child online as well. And that's something which every school we work with, we push that message, and schools are quite good in making sure that message is being delivered to parents.
So, maintaining that kind of behavior is definitely crucial. And that I think puts, the parents at a certain role. So, what is the role of parents in maintaining digital safety and discipline at home?
I think the main role for parents is just vigilance. I think in the day and age of everybody being at work now, it's very difficult. The advantage we do have is, for example, on an Apple device, and I'm sure this is not only limited to Apple, but for example, on an Apple device, you can very easily access your child's screen time.
Right.
You can see exactly what applications they use. You can even limit the number of applications they use, and you can also
Limit the hours
request.
as well at times, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when they go over those hours, you can request. They have to request to you as a parent for you to accept, approve, or decline any further time they need on that device.
Right.
I think that measures like this for parents are very, very helpful, very effective, and I think also this is forms part of that discipline with children, where they know they have a set time for class, set time for leisure, set time for any social browsing that's required, but in a very controlled, measured way.
Right. And this sort of a tracking also helps parents know if there was any misuse of any digital platforms, right? So, what actions are to be taken if students repeatedly misuse the digital platforms during the online classes?
So that's a very valid, very good point you mentioned, Sahar, because how would a teacher manage that, right? Like in a classroom, it's very easy to discipline a child if required. You can take them out of the classroom. You can, set them in a detention if needed, for example, or for a follow up with a senior leader. Online, it's difficult to know exactly what a child is doing unless something is very obvious, whether it's in a text or whether it's a facial gesture. I think one of the easiest ways to manage and control that is just making sure, from a teacher's point of view, online in a classroom, is just to be very vigilant on with the class. The engagement is important. The interaction with the child is crucial. Continuous activities that are being set with the class online for the students to be interactive. And I think, but we also have to be aware of the camera. Now, to understand, not every family or not every child is comfortable to put the camera on. Based on the environment, they might have family members who are not particularly comfortable with the camera on because they're in a room or they're in a bedroom where it's not possible for them to leave the camera on because of other
Mm.
family members, for example. So I think those types of things need to be taken into account. I think where schools can make a real difference here is just providing clarity, clear clarity on exactly what the expectations are when the child is in the classroom, what platforms are to be used, what times the classes will be, how long will they last. I think parents, quite honestly, I don't think parents totally fully understand the full expectations of online learning, because you naturally assume that the child will remain on the class lesson after lesson after lesson, but sometimes there is a bit of a break, and during that break period is when students can go quickly online to a social media platform. They could be speaking to somebody online. They could be, having content delivered to their screens, which is uncalled for, or uh, unbeknown to them. So I think this is really, really important that parents are vigilant about that.
Right. And where we see that parents have a lot of responsibility, I think schools as well have so much that they can do to help protect these students learning online. So, how can schools, you think, can support parents who struggle with monitoring their child's online activity?
I think for schools to support parents, this is very, very important. For example, there are many initiatives and platforms now online, particularly in the GCC. For example, safeguarding that essay is something that we've started as part of our initiative to raise that awareness for safeguarding and child protection in the school and online. I think schools can take a more proactive step by ensuring that continuous newsletters are being sent to parents, and continuous workshops are being delivered, because quite frankly it's difficult to expect parents to understand a topic or an area such as safeguarding and child protection, whether it be in person or online, unless or until a parent has knowledge of that, right? It's not a very known, very widespread topic. So I think it's something which schools can and should be doing more of. I think they've done an excellent job, particularly in the UAE. They're very big on child protection and safeguarding and digital learning, digital safety. Saudi Arabia is also taking that very seriously, particularly post COVID. I think the GCC states have really focused on that. But I think more can be done and should be done from the schools individually. I think they could be delivering workshops for parents, sharing newsletters, sharing just tips. Sometimes just receiving an email from a school about what to avoid, what to look out for, and some tips on what they can and shouldn't do with the children online. I think that would be really powerful.
And are you actually seeing any guidelines or trainings being provided by the organizations like schools, universities?
I mean, not as much as we would like. I mean, our Elite Group and Elite Enrichment Services, which is our entity on the ground in Saudi Arabia, that's what we push. We want to ensure that, whether in talks with Human Rights Commission here as well, just making sure child protection frameworks, both nationally and with the local context, are being pushed out into schools. I think in the international schools sector, yes, it is quite prevalent for schools to make sure this is happening.
Mhm.
However, at a local level, I think more can be done. And that's not a case of schools don't care or they're not aware. I just think it's a knowledge issue. I think it's something where, because it's something that society hasn't really ever seen as a risk until now, with all of the online and AI risks and all of the cybersecurity lessons that need to be learned. That's why I think it's not being as effective as it should have been. But the direction is, I think, very positive. All the schools we speak to, the school leaders we have conversations with, do take this very seriously. Saudi Arabia alone, for example, alongside UAE, they've made it mandatory for cybersecurity to be learnt in schools now as well at a younger age. So these things are now definitely speeding up the process of keeping children safe online.
Right. And now, talking about cybersecurity, as you just mentioned, how do schools protect students from staying away from those fake links during the online lessons?
So I think it is a challenge. It is a challenge. Every school we speak to, it's quite difficult to monitor a child when they're not in that lesson or in that
Hmm.
classroom online.
Hmm.
I think you have to depend heavily on the discipline of the child and the kind of routine set at home. My recommendation always has been to parents, families, and schools is set a clear, structured routine
And
of what
monitor, exactly.
and monitor exactly what will be happening in the classroom, and honestly, sometimes even recording lessons. I mean, it's very easy to record a lesson, even from a parent's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I've urged parents to record your child's lessons online. Go back and take a look. You don't have to go through every minute, but sometimes you can swipe through every few minutes just to see how the lessons going on. How there's clear accountability, both from the school's aspect and from the child's learning aspect, and
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily to catch anybody out, more so just as a protective measure to ensure both the school is protected, ensuring that the effective learning is taking place, because ultimately the child needs to learn effectively. That's the whole purpose of online learning. And from the child's point of view, we need to ensure learning is effective, but in a very safe, controlled, measured way. And I think that's really important in this day and age of online safety.
Yeah, that's a very helpful advice, Sajid. And now, what should students do if they accidentally share their personal data or information online?
So that's a very valid point, because that's something which happens every day. And post COVID, all statistics show, all organizations who do research in this area shown that these risks have gone up almost by 100%
Mm-hmm.
post COVID. So in circumstances like this, if a child has shared information with somebody that they were unaware of, please let somebody know, let your parents know, ensure that you delete, remove, change all your passwords. This is something which is very high risk for phishing emails to be received. From a parent's point of view, they need to keep an eye on their inbox and making sure that the emails coming through are authentic. Then sometimes you will receive fake emails coming through asking for personal information, whether it's about your child, about a school, whether it's about a missed payment. There's a lot of these things happening from all of this criminal activity taking place. So from a child's point of view, if you have shared personal information, and I don't know, let your family member know, delete your browsing history, reset your passwords, and just ensure you're not giving anything away to anybody online that you don't know, you're not aware of, and if you feel you have done something that you're later a little bit worried or scared of, it's absolutely fine. We're human. You can make a mistake. Share that information. That's the only way one can stay protected.
Right. And I think a lot of communication has to be done between the parents and, of course, the children as well, in order to have this aligned for them to know that, it's totally okay to make mistakes. And
Absolutely. I
yeah.
mean, coming from my own life and as an experience as a child, I know I would be very afraid to speak to my parents if I had did something wrong. But that was most other case of, from my culture. It was a respect boundary. It was an aspect of I didn't want to let them down. But now the world has changed, and I think we can't treat children anymore as just expecting to do right and refraining from doing wrong.
True.
Children only learn and grow from mistakes. I think as parents,
So we
it is
have to
very
be
important.
acceptant of that, and we should be open to receiving the information that we get from them instead of just, shutting them up.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, Sahar, which does affect children, which we haven't touched on much in this conversation, is their emotional well-being. I think that's something which, when you go online for a child, if you're an intricate child who's very introverted, for you, it's probably a safe space.
I
You're
was
you're you're at
actually
home.
getting to that. I was going to focus on well being now. And I was going to
Yeah.
ask you that you being a safeguard specialist, can you please
Yeah.
tell us that how do safeguarding teams support students experiencing stress or isolation online?
So I think it's that for me personally, that's something which is a very sensitive topic because I feel there's no replacement and no substitute for human connection face to face and that physical presence. And we behind the screen now. I mean, you and I are talking, and I would love to have this conversation face to face in the studio next to you because you can read energy in a room. And I think that's no different to children. Despite all the counselling available to children online, despite having access to safeguarding specialists from as a school and from a student's point of view, it is very difficult to decipher what a child is feeling. And I think the access is available. Thankfully, you do have many organizations, particularly from the school, who do offer their online support to a student if it's still needed, whether it's in the form of a counselor, whether if it's a safeguarding lead in a school who
Hmm.
needs to speak to a child privately. I think more should be done, whereby is whether you have a separate team online to speak to those vulnerable children. Because for us, from a safeguarding perspective, what happens to the children who were on the radar of safeguarding or who were on the register who were quite vulnerable? Who is following up on them? Then you have an aspect of children who were at risk from home. Now they're at home, but potentially in that risk, not necessarily in the GCC, but just generally wider around the world internationally. So I think from a safeguarding and child protection point of view, it is crucial to follow up on those families, follow up on those children, check in on their well-being, their emotional well-being, their mental well-being, and parents are aware as well that schools are continuously following up, and I think that's really important for a child to feel they have that safe space to go to.
Well, definitely. And before we wrap up, Sajid, what would be your key message to schools, to parents, and students when it comes to maintaining safe and responsible digital learning environments?
I mean, the key message from me would be follow all of the recent guidelines that have been shared, both from the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the wider GCC. And when students are using official platforms, please stick to those platforms. Schools provide clear expectations of what is expected. Schools are quite clear with parents of lesson times, about what should be happening, should not be happening. And my final message to children would be, don't do anything you would not do in the classroom online. Just
Right.
think of that simple. It's as simple as that. And my personal advice would be, just act on that classroom online as in you're being watched all of the time, as you would be in the classroom by a teacher. And naturally, by default, you would continue to behave the same way. And I think that's very, very important. And hopefully, you have a very safe learning experience, a very happy, fun experience while it lasts.
That was great advice, Sajid. We wish them all the best, the parents, the students,
Yeah.
and the teachers in this time that they're all working together in. And, well, you stay safe. And
Thank you.
hopefully, I'll see you in the studio soon next time.
Yes, very hopefully very soon. And I just want to
Inshallah.
again wish you all safety. It is a
You
very
too, as well.
unpredictable time,
It
and
is.
I wish everybody safety. I wish you guys all the best. You're doing a fabulous job under the circumstances to talk about such an important topic. Particularly, I think in this time where so much could be lost in the noise, I think things like child protection, safety, safeguarding. It's very important for us to keep that at the forefront of everything that's happening.
And Sajid, a big thank you to you as well from Mirror Business FM and from myself for joining us from Riyadh today and sharing your expertise on this critical topic. That was really lovely talking to you.
Yeah, likewise, you're very
Stay
welcome.
safe.
Thank you so
Goodbye.
much. Take care. Goodbye.
So, this is all from our discussion today. Do not forget to like and subscribe to Mirror Business FM, and I will be back with more conversations later on. With that, I would like to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. Stay informed, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Mirror Business FM.